There is a specific kind of silence that doesn't feel quiet at all. It feels loud, violent even. It happens when a woman who once explained everything stops explaining. When the one who kept reaching, softening, understanding, forgiving, waiting, checking the emotional temperature of the room like her nervous system was built to survive other people's storms, suddenly goes still. No fight, no dramatic exit, no final paragraph sent at 2:14 a.m., no trembling confession, no begging to be seen. Just absence. And for the avoidant, that absence does something almost unbearable. Because they were prepared for your tears. They were prepared for your patience. They were prepared for your love to stretch itself around their distance and call it empathy. But they were not prepared for your detachment. That is the moment the panic begins. Not always on the outside, not at first. Avoidants are rarely theatrical with fear. Their panic is quieter than that. It hides. It rationalizes. It tells them they just need space, that they're fine, that this is probably better, that they never really wanted anything too intense anyway. But underneath that carefully managed numbness, something starts to shake. Because your silence feels different now. Not wounded silence. Not silence that waits to be broken. Final silence. And that is what terrifies them. Here is the brutal truth most female empaths do not want to hear. For too long, your love was teaching them they could lose pieces of you without losing you entirely. Every time you came back calmer, kinder, more understanding, you reinforced the illusion that your presence was permanent. That no matter how confusing they became, no matter how emotionally unavailable, no matter how many mixed signals, cold withdrawals, half-open doors, and half-hearted reassurances, you would still be there, translating their fear into meaning. You called it compassion. Sometimes it was, but sometimes it was self-abandonment dressed in emotional intelligence. And that changes everything. Because the avoidant was never just responding to your words. They were responding to your pattern, to your emotional availability, to the way you kept making the connection feel safe, even when they made it unstable, to the way your heart kept absorbing the impact. So when you finally detach, what shocks them is not simply that you left, it's that the emotional environment changed. The supply of reassurance disappeared. The familiar rhythm broke. And suddenly, the person who made intimacy feel possible without demanding true vulnerability is gone. That's when their nervous system notices what their ego tried to deny. You mattered. More than they admitted. More than they could tolerate. More than they knew what to do with. This is the paradox of the avoidant dynamic. The more deeply they feel, the more urgently they suppress. Not because they are heartless, not because they never cared, but because closeness activates threat inside them. Not obvious threat, not danger in the adult sense. No tiger in the room, no fire in the building. But to the nervous system, intimacy can feel like exposure. Dependence can feel like risk. Emotional need can feel like losing control. So when love gets too real, the avoidant brain often does something ancient and automatic. The amygdala fires. The body reads closeness as pressure. Cortisol rises. The system moves into protection. Distance starts to feel like relief. Numbness starts to feel like safety. They pull back, not always because the feeling disappeared, but because the feeling became too activating to hold. And this is where empaths get trapped. Because you feel their pullback, and sense there is something underneath it. You can feel the tenderness they won't name, the longing buried under the detachment, the child hidden inside the adult who says, "I just need space." And you're not wrong. That's the hardest part. You're not wrong. They didn't stop caring. They felt overwhelmed. Your warmth touched places in them that were never taught how to stay open. Your consistency reached old wounds that learned love comes with engulfment, expectation, disappointment, or shame. So they managed you the only way they knew how, with distance, ambiguity, delay, emotional fog. Not because you were too much, because what they felt with you was too much for a system trained to survive by not needing anyone. That is why the empath suffers so deeply in this dynamic. You are trying to interpret pain as potential. You are trying to love someone through defenses they mistake for identity. You keep waiting for the breakthrough, for the softened voice, the honest confession, the moment they finally say, "I was scared because I felt so much." But healing does not happen because you love harder, and panic does not begin because you begged louder. It begins when you stop feeding the pattern. That is the core concept no one tells you enough about. Non-reactive detachment. Not revenge, not coldness, not games. Non-reactive detachment is when your energy leaves the chase. It is when your nervous system stops volunteering itself as emotional life support for someone who only reaches when they feel you slipping away. It is when your silence is no longer a strategy to get them back, but evidence that you came back to yourself. That kind of silence is different. It has weight. It has dignity. And the avoidant feels it immediately, even when they pretend not to. Because before, there was still a thread. Even if you said, "I'm done," there was emotion in it. Movement, reactivity, hope, pain. A signal they could still trace back to your attachment. Your words still circled them. Your sadness still involved them. Your anger still proved the bond was alive. But when a female empath truly detaches, the emotional signal vanishes. No more over-explaining. No more decoding. No more last chances. No more trying to make them understand what they benefited from not understanding. You become still in a way they cannot control. And what they lose in that moment is not just your attention. They lose access. Access to the version of you who would stay emotionally available through inconsistency. Access to your softness on demand. Access to your empathy as a cushion for their avoidance. Access to your hope. That is why they panic. Because now they have to sit where you used to sit. In uncertainty. In silence. In the ache of not knowing what the other person feels. And for someone who built their whole relational strategy around avoiding emotional vulnerability, that reversal hits like withdrawal. It is withdrawal. From your presence. From your patience. From your emotional labor. From the dopamine drip of knowing you were still there. And yes, dopamine matters here. Avoidant dynamics are not always fueled by love in its cleanest form. Often they become chemically entangled. The inconsistency creates intermittent reinforcement, and intermittent reinforcement is one of the most addictive patterns the human brain can experience. Unpredictable affection, delayed replies, small moments of closeness followed by distance. This keeps both people hooked, but in different ways. The empath gets addicted to hope. The avoidant gets addicted to access without full exposure. So when you detach, you break the cycle at the level of the nervous system. The reward pattern disappears. The emotional slot machine stops lighting up. The person who was always there to reopen the connection no longer does. Now the avoidant feels what emptiness actually tastes like, and it unsettles them more than they expected. You can almost see the sequence. At first, they tell themselves it's nothing. She's just upset. She'll cool down. She always comes back. She just needs time. Then more time passes. No message. No emotional check-in. No subtle signal on social media. No energy reaching toward them behind the scenes. And something inside them starts scanning. They replay your last conversation. They reread old messages. They hear your tone differently now. They remember the moments you looked tired, not angry, tired. They remember how many chances you gave. They remember that one sentence they brushed past because it was inconvenient to absorb. I can't keep doing this. At the time, they heard pressure. Now, they hear truth. That is when the panic sharpens. Not because they suddenly became emotionally mature overnight. Not because detachment magically cures avoidance. But because loss creates clarity where comfort allowed denial. When you are always available, they can stay asleep inside the connection. When you disappear for real, they wake up. And waking up hurts. They start checking their phone more often than they admit. They wonder if you're seeing someone else. They imagine you becoming unreachable in the arms of your own peace. They feel the ego wound first. How could you stop caring? And then, beneath that, the deeper wound. What if you were the safest love I had, and I pushed it away because safety felt unfamiliar? That thought is unbearable to the avoidant, because now they are not just facing your absence, they are facing themselves, their patterns, their defenses, the way they called emotional shutdown needing space, the way they mistook disconnection for strength, the way they let your devotion normalize their lack of reciprocity. And this is where many female empaths get tested, because often, right when you finally detach, the avoidant resurfaces. A message, a memory, a casual check-in, a sudden warmth, a softness that looks almost like the intimacy you begged for months ago. And your heart, because it is tender and hopeful and beautifully human, wants to believe this means the breakthrough has finally happened. Sometimes it hasn't. Sometimes what returns is not transformed love. Sometimes it is panic. Panic that you became real enough to lose. Panic that their emotional supply line got cut. Panic that your detachment exposed feelings they can no longer suppress. Panic that your absence destabilized the identity they built around not needing much. And panic is not the same thing as readiness. This matters, because if you break your pattern the moment they break theirs, the cycle resets. If your detachment was only a performance, they will feel that too. If your silence was secretly a test, the old energy returns. If you come running the second they open the door 1 inch, they learn again that your boundary can be moved by the smallest hint of longing, and the tragedy begins all over. That is why true detachment is so powerful. It is not reaction-based, it is identity-based. You are no longer asking, how do I make them feel what I felt? You are asking, why did I ever believe I had to disappear inside love to be chosen? That question changes your life, because now the focus is no longer their panic, it is your awakening. You begin to see the old pattern clearly, how you confused understanding with endurance, how you treated your intuition like a tool for decoding others instead of protecting yourself, How you kept trying to prove your value to someone whose own fear kept them from receiving value in a stable way. And little by little, your body starts to unhook. The hypervigilance softens. The obsession loses oxygen. The urge to check, explain, monitor, rescue, interpret, it starts to fade. Your cortisol stops living at the edge of every notification. Your nervous system remembers there are forms of love that do not require self-betrayal. This is the part no one talks about enough. When the female empath detaches, she does not become cold. She becomes clear. And clarity is devastating to anyone who relied on your confusion. You stop romanticizing almost. You stop translating crumbs into promises. You stop calling emotional unavailability depth. You stop making a home inside someone else's unfinished healing. That is when your energy changes, and people feel it, especially the avoidant. Because nothing unsettles an avoidant more than someone who once revolved around them, becoming centered in herself. Now they cannot predict you. Now they cannot rely on your softness being endlessly accessible. Now your peace competes with their old power over your emotions. And suddenly the dynamic flips. They start leaning in. They start remembering. They start wondering if you are truly gone. They start missing the warmth they once managed with distance. They start obsessing over the version of you they only valued fully when they could no longer reach her. But here is the deeper truth. The point was never to make them chase. The point was to stop chasing yourself away. That is the identity shift. Because your power was never in being the one who could endure the most confusion and still love beautifully. Your power was never in proving that your empathy could survive someone else's chronic inability to meet it. Your power was never in staying calm while your needs starved. Your power is in the moment you realize that self-worth is not shown by how long you can hold on to someone who is scared of intimacy. It is shown by how gently and firmly you can let go when love asks you to abandon yourself. That is real power. And yes, when a female empath finally detaches, the avoidant often panics. But that panic is not your purpose. Your purpose is not to become unforgettable so they suffer. Your purpose is to become unavailable to what diminishes you. There is a difference. One is still about them. The other is finally about you. So if you are in that silence now, if your chest still tightens because part of you wonders whether they will come back, whether they finally understand, whether your absence is making them miss you the way you missed them, breathe. Maybe it is. Maybe they are panicking. Maybe they are replaying everything. Maybe your detachment cracked open a truth they spent months outrunning. But let that be their journey. Your journey is holier than that. Your journey is to become the woman who no longer needs someone else's delayed recognition to confirm her worth. The woman who can feel deeply without drowning. The woman who can love fully without overfunctioning. The woman who no longer mistakes emotional exhaustion for devotion. The woman who understands that being chosen late is not the same as being cherished well. And when that identity settles into your bones, something extraordinary happens. You stop feeling abandoned by their withdrawal, because you are no longer abandoned by yourself. That is the real ending of the story. Not their return, not their regret, not the text message that arrives when your heart has finally started healing. The real ending is this. You become inaccessible to unstable love. You become intimate with your own peace. You stop begging to be handled carefully by people committed to misunderstanding you. And in that stillness, in that clean and powerful detachment, you are no longer the woman waiting to be chosen by someone afraid of closeness. You are the woman who chooses herself so completely that anyone who wants access to her has to meet her in truth. No ambiguity, no emotional hiding, no almost love, no more. That is when the panic leaves your body. That is when the power returns to your hands. That is when your silence stops being grief and starts becoming sovereignty. And once a woman reaches that point, once her empathy is no longer a doorway people can enter without reverence, once her love is no longer available at the cost of her nervous system, once she sees clearly that her softness was never weakness but sacredness, she does not need anyone to panic. She is already free.